Before moving forward, I would like to tell you about our brand new offering at Algocamp around the advanced Springboot backend development cohort. So we were getting a lot of requests to actually launch our next iteration of the Springboot cohort, and here we are. This one is far more bigger and better than the last one, and trust me, if you are somebody who is looking to start their journey in the world of Spring Boot in the backend ecosystem, or maybe you already know some things about backend development, maybe in Spring Boot or maybe in some other tech stack, this is going to be a one-stop solution for you. We are going to talk about everything from the absolute beginner level to the advanced level in Spring Boot. We are going to talk about how exactly you can set up your backend ecosystem and backend projects in Spring Boot. We are going to take a microservice-driven architecture and build different projects, including an Uber app, including Airbnb app, payment wallet like Paytm wallet app, and many more. We are going to talk about how exactly microservices can actually communicate with each other in synchronous and asynchronous fashion. We are going to see a lot of interesting microservices pattern like CQRS pattern, Saga pattern for distributed transaction, how you can implement Saga pattern through orchestration and choreography, how Saga pattern is going to help you with respect to the implementation if you compare that with two-phase commit, how you can implement each one of them, what is the outbox pattern, how exactly event sourcing is going to work, how you can integrate Kafka for your event sourcing, and whatnot. We are going to see so many interesting database concepts like how exactly NoSQLs are internally implemented using LSM trees, what are write-ahead logs, how you can replicate your databases, how you can shard your databases, how you can design a good database schema, and whatnot. All the topics that we are going to cover must be listed in front of you on the screen here. What I can say is that this course is going to be one-stop solution to become an advanced backend engineer in Spring Boot. This is definitely going to demand some good time commitment from all the students who are interested, but trust me, this is going to be one hell of a ride. So what are you waiting for? Do check out the link in the description section below and read the complete end-to-end syllabus of what we are going to cover in the Spring Boot cohort. You can actually use the coupon SPRING2025 to get maximum possible discount on the course, and I'm really excited to see you guys in the cohort. Right, do check out the link description section below, and let's get back to the video. So what is Spring? Spring is a framework. It's a Java framework using which you can make enterprise applications, and it comes with a lot of features. One of the most highlighting features is something called as dependency injection. Using dependency injection, you solve the problem of dependency inversion, right? Which is one of the 5 solid principles. It gives you access to aspect-oriented programming, right? And a lot more. You can do transaction management. You can do MVC architecture management. A lot of things you can actually do using the Spring framework, okay? Spring helps you manage the whole infrastructure to develop very complex application part. Okay. So you can see what Spring can do. Using Spring, you can make microservices, you can make reactive applications, right? You can actually make cloud applications, you can deploy them on cloud, you can make web apps, you can handle batch operations, you can do event-driven programming, a lot of things you can do using Spring. Okay. A lot of things you can do actually using Spring. Now, in Spring, now there was one small problem. The problem was that when you start setting up Spring, for example, if you do a quick start, okay, if you do a quick start, right? So nowadays you can see that direct quick start is being done from something called a Spring Boot. Okay, so what is Spring Boot? To understand Spring Boot, you need to understand the problem with basic Spring. The problem with basic Spring is that in basic Spring, a lot of configuration and everything you have to do. Like, it has given you options. It has given you that you can do this, you can do that, you can do that. But you need to configure them yourself. And then comes a new technology built on top of Spring called as Spring Boot. You can see Spring Boot is a very new technology. It's a relatively very new technology when you compare it with thing like Node.js also. Like Node.js was founded in like what, 2009. Spring Boot is built on top of Spring. Okay. It is a Spring project. So Spring has multiple projects. These Spring projects are, you can say, individual libraries that together creates the whole Spring ecosystem. One of those project or libraries, Spring Boot. Now, what is Spring Boot? Spring Boot helps you to set up Spring project with a bunch of predefined configurations. So Spring Boot actually helps you to create a Spring project without you taking care about the configuration of the project. For example, let's say you want to, for example, you want to start setting up a web server using Spring. Then you have to handle a lot of configuration about that web server, that okay, which web server you are going to use, how you are going to connect to that web server, how many threads on that web server do you need, so on and so forth. But if you use something like Spring Boot say, oh, you want to make a web application, so you don't need to bother a lot about how to set up a web server. I know a lot of people have been setting up web server. I know the common configuration all throughout together. What I will do is I will take the most common configurations and set up a web server for you out of the box, so that you can just start developing your applications and do not need to bother about the corresponding configuration part. So it gives you out of the box features of application configuration. For example, how many threads, some common like based on maybe some previous data. I'm not sure how they actually decide this configuration, but what they do is, let's say maybe 200 threads is something which is pretty common for a web server. What they do is they are going to set up a web server for you. You can see, you can, like, by default it embeds Tomcat web server for you. You can also configure Jetty or Undertow or if anything else you want, and set up a Tomcat web server with a bunch of certain set of threads, so on and so forth. That means it is going to handle the configuration part that you had to do yourself in Spring, automatically. That's why nowadays, if you start setting up a new Spring project, for example, if you go to learn quick start, when you say Spring quick start guide, the official Spring documentation also asks you to set up a new Spring Boot project, because at least you will be able to get a bare minimum project with some bare minimum set of configuration that you can just use out of the box. So Spring Boot is a library, or you can say a project built on top of the Spring framework. There are multiple more Spring projects. For example, Spring Data, Spring Cloud, Spring Security, Spring HitOS, Spring AI, Spring CLI. A lot of things are there. Spring Boot is one of them. And the only good use, or I would say one of the most important use cases of Spring Boot, is that it makes easy to create standalone production grade Spring based application that you can just directly run. If you will try to define a Spring application yourself from scratch, you need to set up a lot of configuration, but Spring Boot comes with auto configurations, right? That you can by default out of the box use. This is the core difference between Spring and Spring Boot. You might be thinking that how difficult it is for actually setting up Spring. Now, in a few parts, I will talk about some features of Spring. For example, Spring actually takes care of creation of objects and everything also for you, right? Spring actually takes care of dependency injection for you, a lot of things. But all of these you have to manually configure yourself. And that's a pretty hefty task. All of those tasks Spring Boot takes away from you and gives you a ready to run bare minimum application on the top of which you can write your application level logic. And one more interesting part, it's not like the configuration that Spring Boot is giving you, they are not changeable. You can change it. No problem there. You can pretty easily change it. You can configure it. If you want some other configurations, other settings, you can do that pretty easily. That's the best part that Spring Boot brings into the picture. Okay. So if you compare Spring versus Spring Boot, Spring gives you the core functionalities like dependency injection, aspect-oriented programming, all of that. Spring Boot is built on top of Spring. What it is helping us to do is simplifying the Spring project setup. Okay. If you set up a Spring project manually yourself, you have to do the configuration yourself. If you set up the Spring project using Spring Boot, you will get an automatic set of configurations. Okay. If you want to deploy a server using Spring, then you have to manually configure servers for deployment. With Spring Boot, you get web servers integrated automatically. The overall procedure with just Spring is pretty complex, but with Spring Boot, it is pretty fast, right? You might be thinking, so do we not need Spring anytime? No. Maybe you need very fine-grained granular control about every configuration. You do not want automatic set of configuration. You want to do everything yourself. Maybe that's a use case for you. In that case, you will use Spring framework. But most of the time, in most of the use cases, Spring Boot does the job pretty well for you, right? So if you want to prepare web application, microservices-based application, standalone application, right? Everywhere, when you want a ready to go start a setup on which you can write your application level logic, Spring Boot should be the way to go for. Now, we talked a lot about the great setup procedure about Spring Boot, right? So let's try to set it up. Okay, and then slowly and steadily we will see more features about Spring, what is dependency injection and all of that. All of those features we will talk about. But let's start setting up a Spring Boot project. Okay, to set up a Spring Boot project, there is a website called as Spring Initializer. Okay, which you can open by going to start.spring.io. Start.spring.io. Either you can use this website or you can go to IntelliJ. You can click on new project, and in new project you can select Spring Initializer. Here on the left side you can select Spring Initializer. Both of them are going to help you to do the same thing. For example, you can see in the web app, Spring Initializer web app, it is first of all asking you which build system do you want to keep. Let's say I want to keep Gradle. Which language do you want to keep? Let's say I want to keep Java. Which Spring Boot version do you want to keep? Let's say 3.2.3. What's the group name do you want? What is the description, artifact, package name? Do you want the packaging to be done with jar or var? Which Java version do you need? Any other dependencies do you need? Like any other Spring projects you want to add? All of this is being asked inside Spring Initializer. And if you go to the Spring Initializer with IntelliJ, it is also asking you the same set of things. Which language do you need? Which build system do you need? Group, artifact, which JDK do you need? Which Java version do you need? Which packaging do you need? So on and so forth. Right? So now let's try to set up the project maybe using Spring Initializer. So what I'll do is I'll select project build system as Gradle Groovy, language Java, all of these basic settings, right? And let's say I'll click on generate. The moment you click on generate, can you see it gave us a demo.zip file. If you go to the folder, can you see there is a zip file? If you open it, can you see it's a Gradle project only? All of the Gradle project settings are coming up, right? You can see all of the Gradle project settings are coming up. Nothing more, nothing less. Can I say that? Okay. So if you download this project from here, it is going to eventually help you to download a Gradle project only, which has Spring Boot and everything set up. For example, if I go inside this demo, and if I show you the build.gradle file, can you see this is the build.gradle file, and it has a bunch of few Spring Boot corresponding, I would say, dependencies. Nothing more, nothing less, right? And what you can do is you can use IntelliJ also. So for example, if I go to IntelliJ welcome, you click on new project, you go to this Spring Initializer, this here, you name the project. I'll call it as first Spring project. Okay, the location is my developer folder. Language I want Java. Build system I want Gradle with Groovy language support. Group name I'll keep as com.example, right? And JDK I'll keep as 19, Java version 17. Packaging I'll do with jar. I'll click on next. You can see now here also it is asking for dependencies the same way it was asking for dependencies here, right? So there are a bunch of dependencies. We will go through them one by one. For example, later you will see I'm using Lombok and everything as well. But for now, I will pick a few dependencies. First is Spring Boot DevTools. Okay, now what is Spring Boot DevTools? So any dependency if you want to read about, you can just Google it. Spring Boot DevTools. See? So Spring Boot includes an additional set of tools that can make application development experience more pleasant. Okay, so automatic restart of your, let's say if you make some changes and you want the server to restart automatically, these dev tools can do it for you, right? Reloading, disabling restart, anything like live reload, some global setting you want to set up, these dev tools can actually help you. So we will click on dev tools, we'll get that, and we will get Spring Web. Now what is Spring Web? Again, just Google it. Spring Web. Okay. If you open it, you can see this is Spring Web. Spring Web provides integration features such as file upload, initialization of IOC container. IOC is inversion of control containers, listeners, web-oriented application. So if you have to set up a HTTP client server kind of an architecture, you need Spring Web, right? We'll talk more about these, I would say, projects and libraries step by step. But for now, for the basic setup, I'll select Spring Boot DevTools. I'll select Spring Web. I'll click on create. The moment you click on create, you can see IntelliJ handles everything for you and creates a brand new project. You can see which with a help.md and everything as well, right? And you can see there's a build.gradle file, similar build.gradle file. This time Spring Boot DevTools and Spring Boot Starter Web, I would say dependencies are also present. If you go to source, you go to main, you go to Java, you can see there is something called as first Spring project application. I'll just set up my SDK again. And you can see there is something called as Spring application.run. I'll talk about is what is this Spring application.run, what is this @Spring Boot application. All of this we'll talk about. But you can see currently the whole project is still building. Okay. You can see the whole project is building as a background task. So let's wait for it to complete the building and then we'll try to maybe run the project. And now you can see the building process is actually done. The build process is actually done. And you can see the moment build process will complete, the syntax highlighting and everything will also come up by default. And now what you can actually do is you can see this first Spring project application. You can actually run this code. The moment you try to run it, it is going to build your corresponding project again. Right. You can see it's building. First time build can take up some time. Then later it caches, I believe, a few things. You can see now the build folder is also up. And can you see a brand new Spring Boot framework is up, right? And can you see it automatically configured a few things. For example, it has configured Tomcat. What is Tomcat? Tomcat is your web server. And initialize this web server on 8080. See? Live reload on the server is also working. A bunch of things that already configured. You might be thinking, what is a web server? So there are two concepts. One is web server, one is application server. What is a web server? On web server, the logic, if you say I want to set up a web server, that means the logic of how exactly TCP connection will be set up, how your HTTP request will be made, how your HTTP request will be listened. All of that logic resides on the web server. So in case of Spring Boot, the web server it is using is Tomcat. So Tomcat has all of the logic of initializing a new server where you can listen for HTTP requests, you can make a new HTTP request, all of that connection related stuff. And what is this Spring Boot server? Spring Boot server is based on the top of the web server, which we call as an application server, because on the Spring Boot layer, we are going to write our application level logic, our business logic. So that is a fundamental difference between a web server and a application server. For example, technologies like Rails and everything also, like if you use Ruby on Rails. So Ruby on Rails 5 setup. Okay, so if you, I last worked with Rails 5, so I remember that. Okay, so if you actually see Rails setup, so Rails also uses a web server internally. Let's see if there are some screenshots or anything that might come up. Okay, let's see if we can get some screenshots. No, 1 second. Maybe we can check it in a video or something. 1 second. Gem install Ruby. No, 1 second. Set up a new Rails 5 project. Okay. And if you go to videos, maybe. Okay, we go to Go Rails. And if I actually show you, let's see if the person runs the project or not. Okay, can you see? It says booting Puma. It says booting Puma, Rails S. The moment you do Rails S, there is a command called as Rails S, which turns up a Ruby on Rails, I would say, project. And it boots Puma. Now, what is Puma? Puma in Rails. You can see it's a web server. So similar to that, in Spring Boot, you have web server. So you can use Tomcat, or for example, you can read it here as well. There is something called a Jetty. Maybe you can use Jetty. right? See, you can use something like Jetty, here, Jetty under tau directly, right? You can configure whatever you want whenever you want, right? But by default, the default configuration comes with Tomcat, right? So that's a web server, and it automatically integrated that for us, and it is automatically running on port 8080. So we can even configure this port, like it's a default configuration. Spring Boot gave us this configuration that, okay, this project is working on port 8080. If we want, we can change the port. If we want, we can change the port. No problem there, right? So this is how you set up a brand new plain Spring Boot project. Okay. Now there is a lot of things that actually Spring Boot did, and we are going to go one by one and try to understand what is actually happening. Now let's start exploring the project. Like it might be relatively good if we can actually explore the project and see a few things. For example, as of now, there is only one file that is inside main java com.example.first project. This first project.java file is there. If we are running it, it is running this main Java file only, because this has the main for you. And you can see it's turning up the Spring Boot server for us. Now let's try to communicate to this server. So it is running on port 8080 of my own machine. If it is running on my own machine, and from my own machine I want to communicate, do I need an IP address? No. I can just say localhost 88. That's it. This is how you can communicate. For example, let's say this web server was on some other machine, which was somewhere else in the computer network. Then I need the IP address of that machine and then mention colon 8080, right? But currently the server is also on my machine. I am also initiating a request from my machine. So I don't need the IP of my machine. I can just say localhost, or I can say 127.0.0.1. This also means the same thing, that from my own machine, I want to communicate to my own machine. Or I guess you can also do 0.0.0.0. Anything you can do. 99% you will find people doing localhost. And if I do localhost 8080, if I press enter, can you see there is something called as white label error page is coming up. Okay. So there is an error page is coming up, but something is coming up. If I do localhost, let's say 3000, can you see it says site cannot be reached, because there is no web server running on port 3000. But on port 8080, my Spring's web server is running. Why this error page is coming? Because we have not configured what should happen if somebody reaches to my server, right? There is a web server running, but what to happen, how to handle this, we have not defined. We have to define it manually. Now, before we actually put the logic here, that what should happen when you open localhost 8080 or some other route, let's try to see that currently we are running this whole server directly using the IntelliJ IDEA ID. What if you want to run it without the ID? What if you want to run it with the console? How do you do that? Okay. So I'll take this path. Okay. So there is a Gradle script that you can use, /gradlew, and you can say boot run. There is a Gradle script boot run. If you press enter, it will compile all of the code, start running the boot run script, and can you see the same Spring server is up here as well. It's 80%. And I guess it started already. So if you now refresh port 8080 again, can you see you are getting the same output? So if you want to run the same project without IntelliJ IDEA, you can still run it. How? Using this command, gradlew boot run. So this is again a Gradle script. Now just think about it. If I will just directly tell you gradlew boot run, you will not know what is gradlew. Now because you have the context of Gradle, you know what is gradlew. Gradlew is a shell script, and it has a bunch of tasks that you can run. So for example, if I close it, if I say gradlew tasks, it will tell you what all tasks you have. So in this project, you have a boot run task that runs this project as a Spring Boot application. If you do boot test run, this runs this project as a Spring Boot application using the test runtime class path, and so on. Can you see? Now the logic and the knowledge of all of that build system is actually coming up handy. So as I mentioned that Spring Boot comes with a lot of configurations. Spring Boot comes with a bunch of configurations. In the further upcoming set of classes, I will also show you that how you can update, or how you can actually, let's say, if let's say you want to modify something in the configuration. Let's say you modify what, for example, garbage collector is being used, right? Maybe you want to modify something around that. What is a Tomcat threads, maximum number of threads it is being used? What is the connection timeout that is being used? All of that, if you want to configure, you can actually configure that very easily with Spring Boot, right? So we'll try to maybe make a few changes. For example, if you want to configure a few things around the JVM specifically to your application, you want to set up environment variable, which environment you are using, all of that is configurable. And for that, we have to actually configure this boot run script only. This boot run script that we are going to modify this boot run script for handling a lot of tasks. Okay, for handling a correspondingly lot of tasks. Okay, but for now, what we are going to do is, let's say we want to do one simple thing, that we want to handle how exactly this white label page is going to be working, right? We want to maybe modify it somehow. Okay, so what we are going to do is, I'm going to make a new file and call it controller. What is controller and everything we'll talk about. Okay, so let's say I'll call it as, let's say, hello controller. Okay, I'll make a new class, hello controller. What is controller? Why do you need it? All of this we are going to talk about slowly and steadily. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to annotate this class with something called as REST controller. So the knowledge of REST and controller, everything will take. I'm just showing you some magic going on here and there. And then let's say I'll do something like @get mapping. Get mapping means where we're configuring a get request of slash, let's say, hello. And I say public string get hello. Public string get hello. And I'll say return hello world. Okay. And now you can run the project directly from here, or you can do gradle w boot run. Okay. You can see the server is up. And now if let's say you go to port 8080/hello, you can see you are getting hello world. And you can modify. For example, let's say if you bind it with a b tag. Okay. And restart the server here. Now, one second. Da-da-da. One second. Let's restart once more. Okay, I guess it's up now. Localhost 8080/hello. Once again, what's happening? Da-da-da. Let's do a gradle w clean. Maybe some issue came up. And let's do a boot run again. Okay. One second. Let's remove these b tags for a moment. One second. Something happened. Let's check. Maybe something happened with my network configuration. Just a second. Automatic restart. Okay, probably it might be, let's second, maybe a one-time issue. Let's just run it directly from the ID once. Okay, and one second, let's do it. Let me restart IntelliJ. Sometimes it happens. Maybe some issue might have happened in the build of the project. Let's wait. I'll delete the build and I'll run the project again. I've seen it happening previously as well. Port 8080, it's good. Let's see what the network call is coming up as. It says 404 not found. Interesting. It's not able to find localhost 8080. Just a second. New Springboot server says not found. Okay. Even if we add /hello, still says the same. It's not able to find my server. Let's see, what did we do? Maybe 1 second. Let's make this controller file again. Not sure what happened. Let's delete this. Let's run the server again. So without anything changing, if I tried in incognito, it's working. Probably it is some issue with my Chrome as of now. Okay, you can see things are working up again. And if I close the project, if I create a brand new controller file, hello controller, I'll again do the same thing, annotate it with REST controller, and do a get mapping of /hello public string get hello, and let's say I say return inside a b tag hello world, and let's see if I run the app again. Okay, and let's say if I go to /hello, you can see now it's coming in bold. Coming in bold means it's actually entertaining the b tag that we have written here. And same thing will happen if you run it from the command line. If you run it from the command line, okay, and if you refresh, you can see same bold tag is coming up. So if you will maybe return an HTML string, it will encourage that as a or recognize that as an HTML. Now currently you can see for this /hello we have configured hello world. Maybe let's say what do you want to do is on the on the route you want to say @get mapping on public string get home, maybe a function I'll write, and I'll say return welcome home. And if let's say if I restart, and if I go to this, you can see welcome home. So whatever route you have, right, this is the root route. If you want to configure the root route, you can configure the root route. If you want to configure any specific other route, you can configure that as well, right? As simple as that. So this is the bare minimum basic Spring Boot project that we have with us. Now one doubt that you can get in your head is that this hello controller file is there. Inside this hello controller file, we wrote a bunch of logic and everything, but we never integrated this with our main class. So how exactly this is working? This is the power of Spring Boot. You can see there is an annotation Spring Boot application. I'll talk more about these annotations and everything in the next set of classes. And there is an annotation of REST controller here. All of these mapping internally, Spring Boot automatically handles. You do not have to care about it. That's the best part. So it will automatically detect that you have configured a new GET request and get a response correspondingly from that particular function. That's it. So let's say if you want to build the project and do it automatically again and again, right? Automatic restart. If you want to do, you can configure it directly from IntelliJ IDEA, because we already have this Spring Boot DevTools setup with us. You can see this library, Spring Boot DevTools setup is already with us. So I believe what you can do is you can go to file, you can go to settings, and you can go to build settings. You can search for build. Okay. Build execution deployment, this one, build execution deployment here, right? And here there must be an option of compiler, right? And here you can see there is an option of build project automatically. Can you see there is a project option of build project automatically? This is something that we can technically enable. And if I apply and click on OK, right, I believe this should work. So if I go back to my hello, let's say this application hello controller, if let's say I run the app, okay, if let's say I run the app, and I'll just minimize it a bit, you can see. Now let's say if I make any change, let's say enable one more route slash test, and let's say I say testing, and name the function as get test. Okay, let's see if it is working or not. I didn't restart. Let's see, let's slash test, and you can see testing is coming. If I modify it, testing 1 2 3 4, and if I just refresh it here, okay, again the same issue once again. So probably what is happening is, let's close this, let's open the incognito again, localhost 8080 slash test. You can see testing 1 2 3 4, and let's say if I change it to, instead of testing, I change it to, let's say Sanket sync. Okay, save it, and let's say we go back, and if we restart, can you see Sanket 6? So we do not need to close the project and build it again. All you have to do is go to settings and click on build project automatically. That's it. That's all that you have to do, right? So if you do that, you don't have to rebuild it again. The Spring Boot DevTools will automatically handle everything for you.